Picture this. It's 1960s in the middle of Jim Crow, Alabama. Your phone is just ringing at your house. It's no secret who your spouse is because everyone knows. That phone call, or that phone ringing, rather, could indicate one of two things in that part of Alabama in the 1960s. Either it was encouragement, the ability to keep fighting, the ability to not let your fear get the best of you, to keep up the good fight in the name of your people, because your people have suffered generation upon generation, close to 400 years, from slavery to Reconstruction to now separate but equal, and I say that in quotations. Then that call is comforting. Or at the other end of that phone is resistance, is hatred, is fear. And the greatest fear sometimes was not in knowing that you could die, because you knew in that time you could die. The greatest fear with regard to that phone call is knowing that the person on the other end sees you as less than a citizen even when you are born in this country. However, this gentleman teased you. He asked, "You know where your husband is right now?" That taunting, that hatred, that clear venom that clearly comes through that phone call. That first snippet of video is what I imagine J. Edgar Hoover told Coretta Scott King when she would call, because the King residence, because he was not above having class when he was chasing after MLK to go after his wife in her greatest weakness. It makes a lot of sense in that part of Alabama at the time that they kept an eye on all of their movements and knew when he was home and when he wasn't. So someone watching may ask, well, what does this have to do with Mahatma Gandhi? And today we're going to have that complex conversation about both of these gentlemen. And people will say, well, Mahatma Gandhi shouldn't have in his personal life anything to do with MLK. But one question I want to ask you all right now before I segue to Mahatma Gandhi, who died 20 years by assassination before MLK, a man who looked at his nonviolence movement. And this is the question I need you to be quite frankly ready to answer, and in however way you're going to answer it. Is it now the time for us to talk about the nuances with our so-called public figures and so-called leaders of movements? What I mean is, can we talk about the more seedy part of these people and the things that they did behind closed doors? Are those issues on the table? Even things that they said when they were younger. And that would be the second question, so let me reframe it. Even the things that they said when they were younger and evolved over time. Does it take away from the hurt and pain of those words? All right, so right now we're going to start with Mahatma Gandhi. So I'm going to shorten this as much as I can. Gandhi had basically gone into apartheid South Africa. You see the young Gandhi right here on the screen. You don't see the benevolent older guy in his later years who fought for nonviolence. You're seeing the Gandhi that we are all associated or accustomed to looking at. The older bald man with the glasses who is sure of his spirituality and is sure that nonviolence is the answer. But see, young Gandhi, young Mahatma Gandhi, who went into South Africa to fight for Indian people that were in South Africa for a time between 1893 to 1914. Thought of black South Africans as savages. Now, if you're Black American, you're not given that view of Gandhi. Growing up, some of us were told that MLK took cues from Gandhi. We're given that benevolent old man, not that colorist younger man who was also himself kicked off a train in South Africa because despite the fact that he thought the Indian was above the black African in Africa, what we would now call apartheid after he left, because apartheid was only a fact but not actual enacted laws at that time. You all can look this up. Still let him know you are still what they call a yellow man. So in essence, Gandhi himself enacted the same racial stratification as outlined in that Blumenbach racial category. We Indians know we are under you, but we are still above the Negro. Going back to the Blumenbach video, so you must watch it. I've tried to find that speech in Johannesburg, I believe it was, when Gandhi made the declaration that the Indian who is considered a yellow person is above the Negro. Not exactly Negro, because Negro is more of a term that we use in the United States, the black African. After his constant racism and experiencing it himself, did he evolve? The Gandhi we know, who's a bald-headed man, who wears traditional clothing and who spoke nonviolence, was in theory no longer racist. I don't know the man's heart. I can't find that speech. But indication shows that during that late Victorian era, when he was a young barrister, which I think we call lawyer in the United States, he showed some racist tendencies towards people of African descent. And my question is, if anyone could find it, did he ever truly repent of those things? When I say repent, publicly denounce those past views as a younger Gandhi? Or does it matter since we see as he got older that he evolved? The complexity of people, of course. Now, what does any of this have to do with MLK? Let's start with Reverend Ralph Abernathy. In 1989, there was some belief that some people may have wanted to come out and reveal some complex things about MLK, some rather uncomfortable things that the black community in the United States did not want to discuss. To protect his legacy, some still wanted the MLK who looked up to Gandhi, the non-violent pacifist. The way of doing things is by doing them civil, to prove that you are not the savage that they think your race inherently is. And in some sense, Ralph Abernathy did say that it's not necessarily to disrespect the dead, because we say this in black American community, and to this day a lot of us still hold that you should not disrespect the dead. He was dead and gone. But if you read that quote from Ralph Abernathy's book in 1989, because of course he dies a year later in 1990. Ralph lived a while after MLK. Then you know that despite putting up an act of moral purity, of non-violence, of kumbaya and let's come together, MLK was a womanizer. Now, that in itself is bad, right? But people would ask, what makes him like Mahatma Gandhi when it comes to colorism? Depending on the sources, it was highly known that MLK didn't just mess around on his wife with any type of woman, but rather one that was lighter skinned. Now, today we would say that's a preference, but it, to some people, understandably so, it tells to his colorist views that he had to be with women whom fit a certain ideal, who were likely lighter skinned than him. Not just any woman, they had to be lighter than he was. And in some telling of the story, they would tell you light-skinned prostitutes. Now, I haven't read Ralph Abernathy's book, and I think I'm going to get into reading it because I think it's going to be a worthy read. But what I'm saying is the parallel between these men, with Gandhi initially not liking black people and evolving, if he ever evolved, because I'll allow Indian Americans to discuss that if they are watching this. Then MLK, who put himself out as a beacon of the civil rights movement, but was being watched by the FBI, namely J. Edgar Hoover. And then himself, while talking about racial unity, preferred a woman that looked as close to the very systems that were oppressing him as possible. Because few people, when they think about MLK, they think about the nuance of the man. Not that I'm saying you should, because the purpose of MLK Day is to celebrate something that we know is really not true, which is the unity of race, like color of skin and content of character, because within all races of people, people are practicing selective racism and don't like each other. I'm in no way saying because he preferred lighter skinned women to cheat on his wife with, that MLK was a colorist, though that argument can be legitimately made. Nor am I saying that Mahatma Gandhi may or may not have ever evolved from his racist views of black people. And that's why we go back to the question I asked you all to consider. Are we all now ready to sit down and talk about both of these men's complex legacy, the complex legacy of anyone? Because if I'm going to put Robert Louis Stevenson out there, then we must also address our own so-called leadership. How do you think we'll see these men in 50 plus years? Will we be able to get to the complexities of who they were? At what point should you forgive the past dalliances and the past hiccups of anyone? I'm taking silent pauses to give people time to think. Because it's not shocking that two people who talked about unity and nonviolence were the very ones that in their own way perpetuated colorist views. And again, with regard, I mean to MLK, some people today would call that a preference. And if that's the case, I'm not here to knock your preferences. But I can also appreciate that someone who looks into that and say, well, he's a colorist since he only wanted lighter women, that he was fitting the very racist norms he claimed to be fighting against. Just as Gandhi was getting kicked off of public transportation and being disfranchised himself while calling the people native to their own land savages, when the Indians who were there were also not natives of that land, and still having epithets like him being a yellow man thrown at him as if his yellowness still made him higher than the darky or the dark black man. Are all of our communities prepared to talk about the complexities of the so-called people who led our civil rights movements? Their emotions. Do these things still matter? Why or why not? All right. I know this one was a particularly painful one. I wish I could find that speech of Mahatma Gandhi in Johannesburg to read what he really said about black people when he was younger. That COINTELPRO, I don't think I'm ready for that yet. Because I feel like if you're sitting in Coretta Scott King's place, all you wanted to do was be a devoted wife and mother. And again, I did that thing with J. Edgar Hoover. That was me being a little melodramatic, but I was trying to get everyone to sense the pain and the emotion that this woman felt, to know that the FBI was watching her just because she wanted to stand with her husband and fight injustice. It's time for us to start having deeper conversations about the complex, non-linear nature of the so-called people who say they're leading their own, even with their deaths. Because questioning aspects of their legacy, in my opinion, is not disrespecting the dead. All right. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.